The story introduces us to Ryu, a young man whose job has absolutely nothing to do with fighting. He is a Tamer, and because of this passive class, he lives a quiet, ordinary life. However, memories of his former adventuring party still haunt him. He recalls the painful moment they told him he couldn't join them on their journey. They insisted a Tamer was useless in a fight and had to stay behind, leaving Ryu in disbelief as his friends abandoned him. But when he suddenly snapped his eyes open, he realized it was just a nightmare, finding himself safe back at his farm. As he rose to tend to his livestock, someone unexpectedly caught Ryu's attention. A local girl approached to thank him, reporting that her cat was feeling much better thanks to his treatment, which warmed Ryu's heart. She marveled at how a Tamer could manage a ranch and provide medical care. But Ryu just laughed, admitting he didn't exactly choose this class himself. His class was a divine gift from the church, relegating him to ranch work, while his two childhood friends were chosen as the hero and the wizard. The hero candidate mastered swordsmanship under direct orders from the kingdom. Meanwhile, the wizard dedicated herself to studying powerful magic within the church. Both had secured their glorious paths, setting off on a grand quest to save the world. Ryu, however, found himself in a completely different, much quieter situation. The girl chattered on before realizing Ryu was distracted, eventually revealing that those two famous adventurers were returning home. And as the hours drifted by, Ryu felt a wave of exhaustion. He never expected them to return, especially not after the nightmare he just had. He remembered how the three of them used to joke around, right before the reality of the power gap forced them to leave him behind. That's why he poured his heart into his taming skill, caring for stray dogs and cats with the same dedication he once had for the party. Ryu fantasized about taming a legendary beast to escape his reality, though he knew such a feat was impossible. Suddenly, a strange noise from behind broke his concentration. Monsters rarely appeared this way, so he turned to investigate. Peering through the darkness, he spotted a creature standing directly in front of him. It appeared to be a fox, sleek, jet black, and undeniably beautiful. Or perhaps a wolf. Regardless, the creature was in trouble, its leg ensnared in a trap, so Ryu moved to help. The beast instinctively growled and snapped at his arm, but Ryu gently urged it to stay calm. After prying the trap open, he rummaged through his supplies to find a healing potion. The wolf watched patiently as Ryu uncorked the vial and poured the liquid over the injury. He assured the creature it would be fine now, telling it to run along back to the wild. He heard a rustle, and when he looked back, the mysterious beast had already vanished. Returning to his routine, Ryu finished tending the farm before settling in for the night. As he lay in bed, his thoughts drifted back to the wolf, hoping it had made it home safely. He prayed it wasn't isolated like him. But eventually, exhaustion took over and he closed his eyes. Suddenly, the same wolf appeared before him, casually remarking on what a wonderful night it was. Ryu was paralyzed with shock. This wasn't just a wild animal, but a monster capable of human speech. Realizing he was in the presence of a powerful entity, Ryu nervously asked if there was anything he could do for it. The wolf seemed taken aback by his politeness, a tactic Ryu hoped would keep him from being killed instantly. Cutting to the chase, the creature demanded to know why Ryu had chosen to save it. It couldn't understand why he wasted a precious potion on a beast, leaving Ryu searching for an answer. He sensed a kindred spirit in the lonely creature, but he hesitated, fearing that speaking the wrong words might cost him his life. The beast demanded an immediate answer, warning Ryu that it wasn't exactly known for its patience. It was a do-or-die moment, so Ryu instinctively blurted out the first thing that came to mind. He thought the wolf was beautiful. Flustered, the creature asked for an explanation, and Ryu claimed he couldn't bear to let such a magnificent creature die. Amused, the wolf burst into laughter, admitting that while it had lived a long time, Ryu was the first human to ever try saving it for such a reason. She found him fascinating, noting that he was distinct from any other human she had encountered. Ryu, baffled that the monster was treating this life-or-death encounter like a game, demanded to know what was actually going on. His attempt to save a legendary beast made no sense, yet the wolf simply smirked, decided she liked him, and asked for his name. Telling him to drop the formalities, she listened as he introduced himself, though she instantly sensed there was more to him than met the eye. She then made a shocking declaration. From this moment forward, Ryu belonged to her, and she would hear no objections. Bewildered, Ryu asked for clarification, only to learn that she meant it literally. She was taking him home as her new pet. Suddenly, the wolf expanded to her full, massive size, shattering the roof of the house as she announced their departure. Ryu was stunned by her ability to speak and change size, finally realizing that he was standing before the fierce, legendary Fenrir. But it was too late to run. The beast snatched Ryu up in her jaws, forcing him to brace himself for the ride. After a dizzying sprint through the forest, the wolf announced their arrival and unceremoniously dropped Ryu onto the ground. The atmosphere here was entirely different from the human world. As Ryu gathered his bearings and looked around, he was startled to find himself surrounded by a massive pack of wolves. Dozens of glowing eyes stared back at him, leaving Ryu in shock at the sheer number of these high-level beasts. Looming in the center was a significantly larger creature, clearly the alpha of the pack. The pack growled with killing intent, looking ready to tear the intruder apart right then and there. However, the alpha simply turned to his daughter and demanded to know who this human was, and why exactly she had brought him into their territory. The wolf who kidnapped Ryu tried to defend his actions, claiming he actually liked the human, but the pack leader wasn't hearing any excuses. Demanding answers, the boss asked his daughter where she found this boy, and Ryu explained that they met back at the farm. When pressed for details, Ryu revealed that he had saved the she-wolf after discovering she was caught in a hunter's trap. The leader scoffed, knowing his daughter could break such traps, but Ryu clarified she was pretending to be stuck, causing the boss to sigh at her recurring antics. She quickly pivoted, explaining that Ryu was a skilled Tamer, arguing that his medical abilities might be the only thing that could save her grandfather. The boss remained skeptical, insisting the elder was simply dying of old age, but she revealed the illness was magical in nature and partially her fault. It started to make sense. She had kidnapped him specifically to treat the dying elder. Ryu stepped in, apologizing for interrupting their family drama, but insisted that since he was already there, he might as well be allowed to examine the patient and see if he could help. The leader roared at Ryu's insolence, demanding respect, but Ryu stood his ground, reminding them that they were the ones who kidnapped him for this exact purpose. While he admitted that old age was incurable, he could at least diagnose the situation to see if there were other magical factors at play. Seeing the logic in this, the boss finally relented, grumbling that since the human was already here, there was no point in denying the request. With permission granted, the group made their way deeper into the den to visit the elder. Upon arrival, the daughter respectfully asked to approach, but the frail grandfather immediately sensed a stranger's presence and asked who was there. Before she could even introduce him, our protagonist stepped forward, raised his hand, and politely introduced himself as a Tamer brought by the granddaughter, stating clearly that he had come to cure the elder's illness. The old wolf was puzzled by the human's confidence, scoffing that humans never did anything for free. Everything was always a transaction. The tension in the room spiked, and the surrounding wolves began to growl in anger. The boss snarled, convinced this was just a trick by a cunning human trying to exploit them, and suggested they should just kill Ryu immediately. However, after the initial outburst settled, the grandfather looked at Ryu with weary eyes and asked if the boy truly had the power to help. Ryu affirmed his ability with confidence, declaring that the elder was now his patient, and he wasted no time getting to work. Ryu declared there was only one path forward. The wolf needed to become stronger. When asked why he'd help, Ryu explained that he saw himself in the granddaughter's plight. She was desperate to save her grandfather but lacked the strength to do it alone, forcing a legendary beast to bow before a mere human. Recognizing her sheer determination, Ryu had a request for the master. He understood that feeling all too well, the crushing frustration of being powerless and unable to change one's fate. It was a sentiment he knew the wolf would understand. The elder wolf agreed to the terms, much to the boss's irritation and the granddaughter's delight. When asked how to proceed, Ryu simply removed his glove. He instructed the beast to bite down on his arm and consume his blood. The pack leader dismissed it as a trap, but the grandfather insisted on going through with it. As his fangs pierced Ryu's skin, a blinding aura of magical energy erupted in all directions. The wolves watched in shock as the energy swirled, but once the chaotic surge subsided, the wolf released Ryu's arm, leaving the boy in considerable pain, while the granddaughter frantically asked what had just occurred. They had assumed Ryu was a simple tamer, but his magical reserves far exceeded even that of the hero. It was complex, but the explanation was simple. Ryu possessed so much magic that his body couldn't contain it all. If he unleashed it at once, he would physically explode. While most gain magic through training, Ryu was born with an infinite supply that grew as he aged, essentially making him a walking power leak. Suddenly, the granddaughter noticed a drastic change. Her grandfather had returned to his prime form. He looked more vibrant than ever, a testament to the purity and potency of Ryu's magical blood. Overcome with relief, the young she-wolf couldn't hide her happiness. However, she quickly reminded them that a deal was a deal, and it was time for the wolves to uphold their end of the bargain. She invited Ryu to join their pack, flustering the boy, but the pack leader immediately interjected, refusing to accept a human into their ranks. Despite the debt they owed him, the leader argued that Ryu's overwhelming power made him too dangerous to be left unchecked. The boss prepared to silence Ryu permanently right then and there, but the grandfather unleashed a command that silenced the entire pack. The mere thought of killing their leader's savior is outrageous, casting a heavy, fearful tension over the group that even Ryu can't ignore. It turns out the she-wolf's grandfather is the progenitor of their entire species, a legendary figure possessing immense strength and a volatile temper. The elder wolf addresses Ryu directly, explaining that true peace of mind will only come if he can master his own volatile magic, a feat requiring tremendous power. To achieve this, Ryu must live among the wolves in the forest, undergoing training designed to shatter human limitations and grant him absolute command over his abilities. However, the risks are severe. Failing could cost him his life, and succeeding might mean shedding his humanity entirely. Yet, Ryu is willing to take that gamble if it means gaining the strength to stand beside his childhood friends. With a clenched fist and steely resolve, Ryu accepts the challenge, prompting the elder to bestow a parting gift upon him. He hands over a fragment of his own fang, an incredibly rare artifact radiating with ancient power. This relic will assist Ryu in stabilizing his magic, while the she-wolf is assigned to oversee his brutal training regimen. Despite the danger, Ryu's motivation remains unshaken. He is desperate to bridge the widening gap between him and his friends. Driven by that singular goal, he vows to do whatever it takes to become stronger. Days turn into weeks as Ryu throws himself into the intense, unforgiving training within the forest. During a live combat drill, a ferocious monster lunges at him, nearly landing a fatal blow. But Ryu isn't the same novice he was before. He dodges the strike and immediately pivots into a fluid counterattack. The beast moves with erratic, powerful bursts of speed, making simple evasion a dangerous gamble. Switching to offense, Ryu slices cleanly through the monster's arm before targeting its legs to cripple its mobility. With its balance shattered and its defense open, Ryu seizes the moment to aim a killing strike directly at the head. The monster falls dead, and Ryu takes a moment to catch his breath, calling out to check on his partner's status. Unsurprisingly, the she-wolf has already slaughtered the rest of the pack without breaking a sweat. She glances over, teasing Ryu for his sluggish pace and asking if he's finally done playing around. She handled the rest of the enemies on her own, which is exactly what you'd expect from a legendary wolf. As they sit down to eat, Ryu admits he's absolutely exhausted. While he managed to defeat a low-level monster, he struggled with everything else, though the she-wolf notices his strength is undeniably growing. On his first day, he could barely dodge a single attack, but being tortured by a pack of wolves for months forces a person to evolve. He spent his days being chased to build stamina and learning to survive with nothing but rudimentary techniques. From eating toxic fruit to build poison resistance to adapting to the wild, he was becoming something entirely different from a normal human. Moreover, Ryu still carried the grandfather's fang, proving he was worthy of their attention. The she-wolf beamed with pride for her grandfather, leaving Ryu amazed that high-ranking nobility was looking after him, though she admits that names often bring more trouble than they're worth. Naming a monster is akin to giving away a piece of your soul and sharing your magical power, which is a heavy burden to bear. Her grandfather had named so many subordinates that he eventually collapsed from severe magical exhaustion. Ryu tells her not to look so sad, assuring her that she did her best to help him and that she looks much better when she smiles. Just as they share a moment, another wolf interrupts with an urgent message directly from the boss. Glaring at Ryu with open hostility, the messenger barks that the king wants to discuss his training and expects him immediately. It's clear that despite his efforts, the rest of the pack remains as cold toward Ryu as ever. When they arrive before the king, Ryu introduces himself, and the massive wolf notes his punctuality. Ryu voices his concern that his presence is upsetting the pack, but the king dismisses the worry, stating that he is the one in charge, and the others will simply have to accept his decision. To silence the dissenters, the king proposes a trial. If Ryu passes, he will be officially welcomed as a true member of the pack. The task is to hunt down the snake-tailed rooster. And naturally, Ryu must complete this hunt alone. That creature is a nightmare even for mid-rank adventurers, usually requiring an entire guild party to take down, making it a suicide mission for a beginner. The princess offers her assistance, but the king forbids it, insisting that Ryu must prove his strength solo if he ever wants to earn the pack's respect. Besides, the king observes that Ryu hasn't even begun to tap into the true potential of the fang. The fang isn't just sharp, it is treated to channel magic effortlessly, amplifying the user's will and opening a path to victory once mastered. While hunting the beast shouldn't be technically difficult, the princess assures Ryu that he doesn't need to grasp the weapon's full potential immediately. Since the actual trial doesn't begin until sunset, he has some time to rest and prepare. Once the sun dips below the horizon, the target finally reveals itself. Ryu and the princess observe the creature from a distance to study its movements. The beast is currently in the middle of a hunt, displaying its terrifying abilities. It unleashes a strange power, instantly immobilizing a nearby creature in its tracks. After brutally slamming its prey against the ground, the monster lets out a deafening roar. Ryu is left speechless by the sheer ferocity of the display. Its eyes possess a petrifying magic that turns victims to stone, and its poisonous snake tail is equally deadly, though its inability to fly should make it easier to handle. The princess asks if he's ready, and although Ryu is terrified, he knows he has no choice but to step forward and face the danger head-on. He realizes he needs to watch out for both the main body and the tail, but with time running out, he forces himself to commit to the attack. He decides to neutralize the poison threat first, lunging in to slice the snake tail in half. With the first problem solved, he immediately pivots to aim for the creature's legs to cripple its mobility. However, the beast unleashes a powerful shockwave with its scream, blowing Ryu backward. Realizing this won't be an easy fight, Ryu recomposes himself and lunges with full force toward the monster's blind spot. But the creature effortlessly dodges the strike, and before Ryu can react, the situation takes a turn. To his absolute horror, the flightless bird suddenly sprouts wings. He stares in disbelief, wondering how a creature that's supposed to be grounded is taking to the skies. If it can fly, his ground-based attacks are rendered completely useless. He needs the creature to land, but forcing it out of the sky won't be an easy task. Ryu is forced on the defensive, barely dodging the barrage of incoming strikes. When the princess asks if he's all right, he admits the wind attacks are slicing his skin. This monster can use magic. Ryu frantically searches for a strategy, knowing he needs to find an opening amidst the chaos of battle. He doesn't possess ultimate strength. All he has is this fang and his own mana. But that might be enough. He recalls the king's words. The fang is a conduit, and if he channels his energy correctly, he can manifest his will. There's no time to second-guess himself, as another wave of magical energy comes hurtling toward him. Relying on instinct rather than logic, Ryu decides to gamble everything on this one attempt. He grips the weapon tight, and as he focuses, a surge of magical power erupts, intense enough for even the princess to feel. Staying calm, he lets the dense mana flow into the fang just as the beast launches its final assault. Pushing past his limits, Ryu unleashes every ounce of power he has left. A scorching beam of fire shoots forth, slicing cleanly through the air and decapitating the monster in an instant. Ryu watches in shock as the massive body crashes to the ground, hardly believing he actually pulled it off. The princess cries out in joy, confirming that with the beast dead, the trial is finally complete. Relieved, Ryu tries to smile, but his vision blurs and he collapses from sheer exhaustion. His body has completely shut down, drained of all mana and unable to move a single muscle. He apologizes for being weak, but she reassures him, telling him there's nothing to worry about now. She thanks him for protecting her, urging him to finally get some well-deserved rest. She promises to handle the report to the king herself. Just before he loses consciousness, he feels a hand on his head and looks up to see a familiar face standing over him. But the exertion takes its toll and his eyes begin to close. He drifts out of consciousness, just catching a final voice. Good night. It is the Wolf King himself who appears. He praises Ryu's performance, declaring that with this victory, Ryu is now officially recognized as a member of the pack. By the next day, the entire pack is buzzing with excitement, swarming Ryu to play, leaving him overwhelmed and asking for space. The princess explains that passing the trial has made him an instant celebrity among the wolves. He's invited on every outing, from hunting trips to playing with the pups, and as his skills sharpen, he finds himself genuinely happy. However, one individual refuses to accept this new reality: the princess's father. He harbors a deep grudge, insisting he will never approve of a human, casting a glare that instantly dampens Ryu's mood. Suddenly, the princess's mother appears and stomps on her husband's head, scolding him to stop being so childish. Since the mother holds the true authority, the topic shifts to Ryu's need for proper clothing, as he lacks the skill to craft fur garments himself. He considers heading to a human city to buy gear, but lacking money and facing the risks, the princess suggests consulting her grandfather first. But before they can decide, a voice demands they stop immediately. It's the father again, accusing Ryu of potentially selling their location to humans, and Ryu realizes that leaking such intel would endanger the entire pack. Understanding the complexity, the princess asks her grandfather for alternatives, when another wolf steps in with a suggestion. The grandmother proposes that if humans are off limits, perhaps Ryu should be introduced to a dwarf instead. Though small, dwarves are incredibly strong and possess the master craftsmanship required to create the clothes Ryu needs. The king confirms he knows of a settlement near the Dwarf Islands and has personal connections who might help. The father grudgingly agrees, but only on the condition that the princess accompanies Ryu to ensure no secrets are betrayed. It was time for her to see the wider world, and as long as she was by Ryu's side, she knew she'd be safe. Her grandfather checked her nerves, and she responded with a confident wag of her tail. Her father, however, was still being difficult, refusing to accept Ryu until his wife silenced him with a swift punch. Ryu noted that the women in this family were definitely the ones in charge. The grandfather taught Ryu some spatial magic to help transport their supplies, and suggested he take some monster materials to sell for gold along the way. Ryu wasn't entirely sure how the trip would play out, but he was grateful for the help. He wondered what kind of adventures awaited them on the road to the Dwarven Kingdom. After mastering the storage spell, Ryu packed up their provisions and loot. With the logistics handled, there was nothing left to do but head toward the dwarves' territory. Ryu looked around for his companion, and the family told him she'd be ready in seconds. When she finally emerged, Ryu was struck completely speechless. Standing there was a stunningly beautiful girl in human form. For a split second, Ryu thought a stranger had joined them. But when she spoke, asking him what he was thinking, he recognized the voice immediately despite her new appearance. Her transformation was a perfect success, which would make interacting with human society much easier. Ryu suddenly realized this was the same human figure he had glimpsed briefly during their first battle. She explained that she had been practicing this transformation for ages, though it drained a lot of mana. She warned him that maintaining the form might be unstable at first, so she'd need to be careful. Before they departed, the grandfather had one final, significant request. He wanted Ryu to bestow a proper name upon his granddaughter. This wasn't just a nickname. Naming a monster meant forming a powerful soul contract. Fortunately, Ryu's immense magical reserves were more than enough to handle the burden. While a human naming the magical beast was rare, it would officially make her his familiar. This bond granted benefits like telepathy, though it was a serious commitment for both parties. Ryu didn't hesitate. The grandfather owed him his life, and the princess had longed for a name of her own. After surviving the forest together, her trust in him was absolute. But more than anything, she deeply desired to receive her name specifically from Ryu. Accepting the responsibility, Ryu stepped forward and gently placed his hand on the girl's head to initiate the ritual. The contract required a name to be spoken and accepted to be sealed. Ryu looked at her and gave her the name Ruri. Ruri accepted the name, sealing the bond instantly. She paused, repeating Ruri softly to herself. Ryu worried it might be too simple, but she quickly reassured him. She loved the simplicity of the name and thanked him with a beaming smile. With the contract successful and spirits high, it was finally time to move out. Ruri said her goodbyes to her grandfather, grandmother, and mother, while pointedly ignoring her stubborn father, and their new journey began. Their journey became a monotonous cycle of walking, eating, and sleeping. To pass the time, Ruri described the Dwarven Kingdom, recalling her grandfather's stories of a majestic nation built near the mountains filled with wonders. However, when she noticed Ryu hesitating, he admitted that pronouncing the nation's name was proving to be a bit of a tongue twister. The long trek had also brought them physically closer, creating an intimate atmosphere in the secluded forest, though Ruri knew she'd have to compose herself once they reached civilization. Deep down, she desperately wanted to shower Ryu with affection, making her struggle to maintain a serious facade all the more difficult. Finally, their long trek came to an end as the walls of the dwarven city rose up on the horizon. Ruri prepared to march right in, but Ryu stopped her, insisting she transform back into her wolf form since she lacked the proper identification papers. Most cities had strict entry protocols. Entering as a human would get her arrested, but walking in as Ryu's familiar would bypass the bureaucracy entirely. Understanding the plan, she shifted back into a wolf, and they joined the queue, where Ryu confirmed with the adventurer ahead of them that they were in the right line for immigration. Since it was Ryu's first visit, he mentioned his intent to sell materials and commission some clothing, which the stranger confirmed was a wise move given the city's skilled artisans. The helpful stranger introduced himself as Mark, a fellow adventurer and merchant who offered to show Ryu the ropes, a gesture for which Ryu was incredibly grateful. When they finally reached the checkpoint, the guard interrogated them. Ryu explained he was there to trade materials and pick up quests, prompting the guard to ask for his registration status. Ryu admitted he wasn't registered yet, and planned to sell through the guild, so the skeptical guard demanded to inspect his cargo just to be safe. He handed over the goods, and the dwarven guard inspected them, only to suddenly pause and instruct Ryu to stay exactly where he was. The guard conferred with his colleagues before returning with an elderly official who appeared to be in charge of the outpost, and the elder politely but firmly requested that Ryu accompany him for a private conversation. Once they were in a secluded room, the elder explained that the inspection had raised some urgent matters they needed to discuss immediately. They were desperate to know where Ryu had acquired such high-quality fur, and expressed an immediate interest in purchasing the entire stock for the city right then and there. Ryu was baffled by their intensity, but he quickly realized the sheer quality of his materials had triggered a bidding war before he'd even entered the gates. He hesitated, explaining to the elder that he couldn't sell just yet, as he had hoped to show the materials to a specific craftsman in the city first. When asked if there was anyone specific he wished to visit, Ryu dropped the name Dwar Crown, causing the guards to freeze in place. An uncomfortable silence immediately washed over the area, Confused, Ryu asked if he'd said something wrong or if the man was dangerous, explaining that an old man had simply recommended the name to him. To his shock, they revealed that Dwar Crown wasn't just anybody. He was the king of the city, leaving Ryu completely dumbfounded. As they headed into the city, Ryu marveled at his connections, momentarily forgetting that high-level figures often communicated via telepathy, a detail he had completely overlooked. Since meeting the king would have to wait, he decided to visit the guild to offload some materials, but he was quickly intercepted by Mark, who shouted that he was late. Mark had been anxiously waiting, complaining that the inspection took forever, so Ryu apologized and explained that the guards had been thorough with his cargo. Changing the subject, Ryu asked for directions to the Adventurers Guild, and Mark happily replied that it was actually just around the corner. Following Mark's lead, they quickly arrived at the bustling establishment. Mark explained the layout as they entered, noting that the guild was strategically placed near the city gates for easy access. He pointed out the main reception desk located at the back of the hall. There were separate counters for general inquiries and mission reports, but since Ryu was there to trade, Mark directed him specifically to the purchase reception used for buying monster parts. At the counter, the receptionist asked to see his goods, and Ryu decided to sell only a single piece for now, saving the higher quality items for the king later. He pulled out a massive bundle of fur, telling the staff he wanted to exchange the entire pelt for cash. It appeared to be large boar fur, but as the receptionist examined it, Mark stared in disbelief, asking where on earth Ryu had acquired such a prize. A crowd of adventurers gathered around, marveling at the sheer size and quality of the pelt, whispering that this wasn't just a normal boar, it was likely a magic boar. Ryu tried to play it off as common game, but Mark corrected him immediately, explaining that a giant magic boar was a high-ranking monster that no ordinary person could take down. It became clear that living in the forest had completely warped Ryu's common sense regarding value, a fact confirmed when the receptionist stated the initial offer. She offered 62 gold pieces, a sum Ryu realized was enough to live comfortably on for a very long time. He accepted the deal without hesitation, and the receptionist promptly counted out the gold, completing the transaction. The adventurers crowded around, praising Ryu's incredible haul and suggesting he could make a fortune as a merchant or a high-ranked hero. Ryu could hardly believe it himself. He had actually become strong enough to defeat valuable monsters, a transformation that left Rory wondering who had trained him. With his funds secured, Ryu prepared for his audience with the king, hoping the meeting would go smoothly without any complications. Meanwhile, back within the walls of the royal castle, a different kind of commotion was taking place. A guard hurriedly approached the throne room, desperately trying to catch the king's attention. When asked about the disturbance, the guard apologized but insisted that an urgent matter required the king's immediate judgment. A man had arrived seeking an audience to appraise some materials, but the items in his possession were of extraordinary value. The goods came from high-level monsters, raising suspicions about the stranger's identity, and the guard needed instructions on how to proceed. Without hesitation, the king ordered his men to bring the stranger to him immediately. He sensed that this mysterious individual could be a tremendous asset to the city. Under no circumstances were they allowed to let him leave the premises before the meeting took place. Unaware of the royal panic, Ryu stopped by a laundry service to get his gear repaired. The seamstress mentioned she had removed several thorns from the fabric, and Ryu thanked her while returning the pajamas he'd borrowed. She frankly asked what he had been doing to ruin his clothes, noting that he looked like a bandit when he first arrived, a comment Ryu couldn't exactly refute. When Rory asked about his plans, a royal messenger arrived at the most awkward moment, leading the other adventurers to believe Ryu was a VIP in disguise. Deciding to just roll with the misunderstanding, Ryu headed straight for the palace to see what the king required, but upon his arrival, he found the entrance flanked by guards who stood frozen in complete shock. To everyone's surprise, the king himself was waiting right at the front gate, standing beside the valuable materials Ryu had submitted. This was the moment the king had been waiting for. After the guards warned Ryu to remain respectful, they swung open the heavy doors to the king's hall, allowing Ryu to step inside, where the monarch scrutinized him with an intense gaze. Ryu immediately sensed the dwarf's immense power. While he wasn't on the level of the chief or Ryu's master, he could definitely hold his own against high-level monsters. Realizing he needed to tread carefully, Ryu knelt before the throne, introduced himself, and declared his profession as a beast Tamer. The king commanded him to rise, acknowledging the soldier's reports, and asked what business brought him here. In response, Ryu presented his raw materials for inspection. Immediately suspicious, the king accused Ryu of stealing the items, a charge the confused Tamer instantly denied. He insisted that he hunted the beasts himself, wondering why this so-called king was being so incredibly rude during their first meeting. The king claimed his expertise allowed him to appraise goods from a distance, and he refused to believe a mere Tamer could survive the great forest to hunt those cursed foxes. Hearing the word cursed, Ryu decided it was best to keep the truth about the wolves hidden, so he lied and claimed a friend had helped him. The king pressed further, questioning what kind of suicidal adventurer would enter the great forest, and demanded to know the identity of these supposed hunters. The whole situation felt off. Ryu realized the king's hostility was unnatural, but he knew he had to tread carefully despite the mounting suspicion. It was strange that the king hated the wolves so much, and the excessive number of armed guards surrounding the throne for just one human visitor was a major red flag. Just as Ryu questioned if coming here was a mistake, the king offered a deal. He would craft the clothes, but demanded every single pelt as payment. Ryu immediately stood up and refused the extortion, leaving the greedy king confused by his defiance. He asked if the monarch even realized how ridiculous he sounded, though the king seemed completely oblivious to his own greed. When the king claimed he simply didn't trust him, Ryu fired back that he had no intention of doing business with a swindler, royalty or not. The guards bristled with rage at Ryu's tone, but the protagonist wasn't trying to start a coup or challenge the king's authority. He simply realized that this negotiation was a waste of time, a sentiment that infuriated the king and caused him to snap at Ryu's perceived disrespect. The king immediately ordered his guards to arrest everyone present. Ruri was ready to fight back, but Ryu stopped her, warning that taking on the entire kingdom was a suicide mission. When the king asked why he wasn't resisting, Ryu played it cool, admitting he wasn't foolish enough to fight an army alone. The king smirked, praising Ryu's intelligence for recognizing the futility of resistance. Satisfied with his compliance, the tyrant ordered the guards to throw them into the dungeons. No sooner said than done. Ryu and his familiar were dragged away and tossed into a cold, damp cell, leaving them completely stranded. They hadn't anticipated having all their valuable furs confiscated so abruptly. Ruri immediately suggested they break out and steal everything back, but Ryu hesitated. Making a scene now would only get them exiled or worse, especially since they needed information about Ruri's father. Fortunately, the guards had failed to confiscate Ryu's knife, giving them a small advantage. Suddenly, a voice from the shadows caught Ryu's attention. A stranger sitting right behind them asked what a new guy was doing in the dregs. Ryu was startled. The man had been so quiet he hadn't even noticed he was there. Ryu explained that his only crime was refusing to sell his monster materials to the king, realizing now that the monarch was arresting anyone who defied his greed. When Ryu asked the stranger what he was in for, the man grimly replied that he had been charged with high treason. It turned out the man was a dwarf who had tried to stop the reckless hunting in the great forest, warning the king that his people stood no chance against the wolves. The crown was trying to cover up the wolf's curse incident, and for speaking the truth, this dwarf had been silenced and thrown into the dungeon. As they spoke, the dwarf, who happened to be an old friend of Ruri's grandfather, revealed a shocking secret. The man sitting on the throne was a fake. The imposter was practically a twin brother to the true king, identical in every way, which left Ryu completely baffled by the deception. The usurper had secretly brainwashed the soldiers and imprisoned the real monarch. Since the true king rarely appeared in public, no one had noticed the switch. The dwarf had grown suspicious after the Great Forest invasion, which led to his imprisonment. He confirmed the real king was being held in a high-security cell within the castle, far more guarded than their current cage. That area was a fortress, sealed by a powerful curse that made the cell doors virtually impossible to open. Realizing that Ruri's grandfather had ties to the true royal bloodline, Ryu decided they had to save the real king. He told Ruri to get ready and asked the dwarf to cover for them. The dwarf was perplexed, insisting that breaking out was impossible, even with dwarven strength. But Ryu simply smirked and told him nothing was impossible. With a casual strike, he and Ruri shattered the cell bars as if they were made of glass. With the path clear, Ryu signaled them to press on, prompting the dwarf to ask who he really was. Ryu simply replied that he was a humble beast Tamer, assisting the man to his feet alongside his familiar. As they navigated the labyrinthine dungeon, they eventually reached their destination. At the end of the corridor stood a heavily fortified, sealed door where the true king was being held. 2 guards blocked the path, but knowing the king's survival was paramount, Ryu turned to the dwarf and asked if he could fight. As a warrior, the dwarf was more than capable. But without a weapon, he was defenseless, so they needed to procure one carefully. Without wasting a second, they rushed the guards, who shouted in confusion at the sudden ambush. The soldiers threatened to cut Ryu down, but he calmly ordered Ruri to distract them and aim for a knockout rather than a kill. Ruri immediately understood the command, effortlessly dodging an incoming strike from one of the guards. Compared to the monsters Ryu usually trained against, these dwarves were slow and predictable, making this battle all too easy. Ryu chopped one guard's neck to knock him out, while the other swung his sword at the wolf, only to realize Ruri had already snapped the blade in half. Seizing the opening, Ryu stepped in and delivered a swift blow to render the second guard unconscious. With the guards down, their companion was shocked at how easily the soldiers fell, unaware that Ryu's rigorous training made them look weak by comparison. Now, only one obstacle remained, the massive solid iron door standing before them. It was sealed with a curse preventing escape from the inside. But fortunately, the magic didn't seem to protect it from an external breach. Wasting no time, they unleashed a powerful strike, smashing the heavy door completely off its hinges. Inside the cell, they finally found the figure they had been searching for. The king was lying on the floor, weak and confused, asking who had come to disturb him. Ryu introduced himself as a simple beast Tamer, and confirmed the man's identity, leaving the king stunned that such a person had orchestrated his rescue. The king apologized for his brother's treachery, but Ryu dismissed the apology, stating that he simply had one important question to ask. Ryu asks if the king can craft him some clothes, prompting the monarch to question why he was chosen. Ryu explains that the wolf chief recommended him as a master artisan capable of creating anything. The king remains skeptical, claiming a wolf lord shouldn't possess such knowledge. Suspecting a trap, he demands immediate proof of this wild claim. Ryu presents the wolf fang and points to Ruri, the wolf king's granddaughter in human form. This undeniable proof silences the king's doubts, and he immediately apologizes, promising to fulfill Ryu's request. With the deal struck, Ryu steps forward and slices through the remaining restraints on the cell gate. The king expresses his gratitude, confirming that he is unharmed and is the last prisoner who needs freeing. Now free, they are ready to march forward and confront the false king. However, the true king insists that Ryu doesn't need to interfere. He admits he was caught off guard before, but assures them his men won't lose this time. This mess was caused by his younger brother, and it is his duty as the older sibling to clean it up. Understanding the family dynamic, Ryu and Ruri decide to withdraw, planning to return once the dust has settled. The king rallies his loyalists, leading the charge to reclaim his throne from the imposter. Meanwhile, Ryu suggests to Ruri that they should make their way back to the inn. But as they navigate the winding corridors, Ryu realizes he has completely lost his bearings. Ruri suddenly stops, asking if Ryu hears a strange sound echoing nearby, resembling the cry of an animal. They suspect it might be a creature kept for crafting materials, but they remain on high alert just in case. Following the noise, they cautiously round the corner of the corridor. What they find catches them completely by surprise. Sitting there is a small bird-like creature, whimpering in distress. Ryu steps closer to inspect the seemingly frail monster. Suddenly, it breathes a stream of fire at him, forcing Ryu to jump back in shock. Ruri immediately notes that this is no ordinary animal. It is definitely a dangerous monster. The creature unleashes a torrent of fire until it collapses from exhaustion, prompting Ryu to reassure the beast that he isn't an enemy. It becomes clear that the poor thing is weak from starvation, likely having been trapped without a scrap of food for quite some time. Deciding to help, they take the bird along with them as they head out to find a restaurant. Once they settle down at a local eatery, Ryu orders a meal suitable for their new companion. They feed the creature some meat, and despite its small size, it has a ravenous appetite. However, when it tries to follow them afterward, Ryu insists it should go live freely. But as he turns to leave, the bird refuses to part ways, perching stubbornly on Ryu's hand as if claiming him. Ruri realizes the monster has grown attached to him and asks if he plans to make it his familiar, though Ryu admits he didn't save it with that intention. Still, he decides that if the creature prefers his company over the wild forest, he won't force it away. Ruri looks a bit jealous but accepts the inevitable, and the group decides to spend the night at an inn before returning to the village to help with the recovery. The next morning, Ryu wakes up feeling trapped, unable to move a single muscle. It isn't fatigue holding him down, but rather an immense crushing weight pressing directly onto his stomach. He assumes Ruri must have climbed on top of him in her sleep and groggily asks her to scoot over. But when he finally opens his eyes, he discovers a massive bird occupying his bed. Startled by the giant creature, Ryu lets out a panicked shout, completely caught off guard. Ruri wakes up from the commotion, asking why he's screaming, only to see the source of the heavy pressure. She immediately recognizes it as the small bird they rescued yesterday, shocked by its sudden and rapid growth. It turns out this species evolves by absorbing magical power, and since Ryu fed it, it grew instantly, something the novice adventurer hadn't anticipated. Their surprise is interrupted by a knock at the door, causing the giant bird to flee out the window just as the innkeeper enters. She delivers a message from a soldier stating that the king requests Ryu's presence at the castle, so they head over immediately. Upon their arrival, the king welcomes them warmly, confirming that the previous crisis has been resolved. The king proposes a solution. His brother will craft Ryu's new gear as atonement, but first, he demands his brother come out of hiding. The younger brother steps forward, bowing his head to apologize for the chaos he caused earlier. Surprisingly, Ryu accepts the apology without hesitation, telling him it's water under the bridge. Noticing the shift in the man's demeanor, Ruri asks the burning question: why did he impersonate the king in the first place? The truth comes out. It was born from a deep-seated jealousy of his older brother. Since the king was renowned as the city's top artisan, he monopolized all the work, leaving the younger brother feeling humiliated and useless as a toolmaker. Driven by envy, he trapped the king with false intel, usurped the throne, and ordered the soldiers to hoard materials so he could finally work. When Ryu arrived with high-grade loot, the imposter recognized the quality instantly and assumed he could just buy the Tamer off with gold to get the materials. But when Ryu refused to sell due to mistrust, the brother's inferiority complex triggered a rage he couldn't control, leading to the attack. As he finishes his confession, Ryu understands the motive, but then the true king steps in to share the blame. He realizes he neglected his brother's feelings for years, and to make amends, he proposes a specific arrangement. He insists that his younger brother be the one to craft Ryu's new equipment. Ryu is confused, but the king explains that his brother actually possesses greater manual dexterity and will create superior gear. This assignment is part of their reconciliation, acknowledging the skill that was always present but overshadowed by the king's reputation. The king admits he hogged the work out of duty, never realizing he was crushing his brother's pride by denying him the chance to create. If they had just collaborated from the start, this tragedy would have been avoided. He admits he failed as a brother. So, to prove his trust and restore his brother's honor, he's handing this crucial project over to him entirely. With Ruri's encouragement, Ryu agrees to the terms, trusting the city's unrecognized genius to handle his precious materials properly. The brother is stunned by this second chance, vowing to exceed everyone's expectations and produce work that justifies their forgiveness. He would always be essential and recognized as a true artisan, so there was no need for words. He didn't need to prove his worth, knowing his hands were capable of creating anything required. Instead, he simply declared that they would forge something truly incredible together. Overwhelmed with emotion, the brother began to weep as he firmly squeezed his sibling's hand. He vowed to craft the finest garments in existence, surpassing anything in the kingdom, or even the entire universe. With the matter settled, just as Ryu had hoped, the king apologized for the delay, noting that work would begin once they discussed the materials. Meanwhile, back at this farm, a significant amount of time had passed since the owners were last home. Ryu's two childhood friends finally returned, now nearly unrecognizable to the locals due to the heroine's skyrocketing popularity. Their first priority was to check on Ryu. Despite the long separation, they hoped their old friend was doing well. However, upon arriving at the property, they were shocked to see the house completely destroyed, with nothing left but rubble. A local farmer approached the stunned heroes, and the heroine immediately cut to the chase, demanding to know where Ryu was. The support character stepped forward to de-escalate, asking why the place was in ruins, and urging the man to explain what had happened. The farmer revealed that Ryu was missing, prompting them to ask exactly how long he had been gone. He explained that 2 months ago, during a full moon, a deafening noise shook the night, and by the time neighbors arrived, the house was already obliterated. When asked for a reason, the farmer was stumped. Ryu was a diligent worker beloved by the animals, so he wouldn't just abandon them without cause. However, investigators had found strange fur among the wreckage, suggesting a monster had attacked the livestock that night. The heroine refused to let this go and wanted to hunt for Ryu immediately. But the support convinced her to stay calm and search for clues along their travels instead. She mounted her horse, silently pleading for Ryu to wait for her, vowing to find him no matter the cost. If he was still alive out there, she wasn't going to let anyone or anything stand in her way. Meanwhile, Ryu sneezes loudly, prompting Ruri to ask if he's coming down with a cold. Back at the smithy, Ryu stood alongside the king, watching closely as the king's brother made the final preparations for the forge. At first glance, the setup seemed perfect for the task at hand. However, the flames died out far too quickly, much to everyone's disappointment. The blacksmith admitted defeat. Despite the intense heat, the Wolf King's fang remained too strong to be molded. He realized that to work with such a material, they needed a flame generated by a magical beast equal in power to the Wolf King. Ruri immediately suggested using the flame of a mythical bird, though Ryu was confused about where they would find one. The blacksmith realized she was referring to the legendary divine bird, a creature rumored to possess enough power to slay even dragons. Ryu remained baffled, asking if he was supposed to know about this specific monster. Ruri sighed and explained that he did know it. It was the strange chicken they had encountered earlier. Shocked, Ryu listened as Ruri pointed out that only a high-ranking beast could grow so massive in a single night. There was no doubt that the bird was a divine entity, but the pressing question remained, where was it now? It had escaped towards the mountains behind the castle, and since not much time had passed, it likely hadn't gone far. Seeing a chance to finally forge the fang, the blacksmith asked Ryu and Ruri to head out and hunt down the bird. Ryu agreed to the task, recalling the bird's appearance, though finding it would be easier said than done. Once they reached the wilderness, however, Ryu realized he had no idea how to track the creature. Ruri, however, could sense the beast's magical signature nearby, essentially using Ryu as bait to draw it out. As they scoured the area, their search paid off when Ruri heard a distinct cry coming from the ground below. To their surprise, they spotted the divine bird desperately fleeing from a massive predator. Even when it tried to flap its wings, the poor creature couldn't generate enough lift to fly. Suspecting it was injured, Ryu asks Ruri to heal it, and after dispatching the giant monster, they decide to take the bird with them. The exhausted creature falls asleep immediately, proving much easier to acquire than the flowers, though Ruri wonders if it has any parents nearby. Since it was all alone when they found it, they have no clue where its nest might be or where it should return to. The king approaches to check on its condition, relieved to hear that its injuries are minor and it just needs time to wake up. While they discuss their next move, the bird finally stirs and opens its eyes. Ryu speaks gently to the creature, assuring it that it can rest for as long as it needs to. However, the bird is terrified of the dwarves and flutters over to Ryu for protection, prompting him to comfort the trembling animal. Seeing this bond, Ruri suggests that Ryu should officially make the bird his familiar. When Ryu asks why, she explains that the creature clearly feels safe with him and refuses to let anyone else near, so forming a pact would benefit them both. The king agrees with her reasoning, noting that securing the bird's cooperation is essential, so it is time for Ryu to make a decision. Ryu opens the window and gestures outside, asking the bird if it wants to leave or if it is willing to lend him its strength. He explains that it is free to fly away with no hard feelings, but if it wants to help people, it can stay by his side. The choice is entirely its own. The entire room holds its breath, waiting to see what the creature will do. Instead of flying out the window, the bird hops from Ryu's arm up to his shoulder. It seems more than happy to become Ryu's new familiar. Delighted by the outcome, Ryu thanks Ruri for the suggestion and realizes he needs to give his new companion a name immediately. The toolmaker is stunned that Ryu contracted a legendary bird, and the king insists on holding a public ceremony to celebrate such a rare and auspicious event. However, when they arrive at the city center, they find a strange crowd already circling the area. The civil guard and even Mark are present, which is suspicious since this many people rarely gather without prior notice. The king apologizes for the commotion, noting that a royal appearance inevitably draws a crowd, though he never intended to cause such a scene. He offers to reschedule, but Ryu insists that it is necessary to move forward right now. Realizing it is time to bestow a name, Ryu locks eyes with the bird, preparing to seal the pact that will bind them as master and familiar. Pausing to reflect, he realizes this isn't just a contract. It's a ritual to welcome a new family member, a rare and joyous occasion. The bird seems to smile in agreement, sensing no hesitation, and signals that it is ready to proceed. From this moment forward, the bird shall be known as Karen. As the contract is sealed, a sudden storm begins to swirl around them. The onlookers are baffled by the phenomenon, noting that nothing this intense occurred when Ruri formed her pact. Suddenly, Ruri draws Ryu's attention to the center of the energy, where a mysterious egg has materialized. They wonder what triggered this transformation, realizing the creature is evolving through a unique magical process that defies common understanding. This evolution grants the form the creature truly desires, triggered by its genuine wish to become a pillar of strength for Ryu. Ruri has no idea what shape it will take, but she's ready to welcome them regardless, and the two share a knowing smile as the process concludes. Ryu calls out to Karen, urging her to emerge from the egg, and his voice acts as the final catalyst. The shell shatters, and a beautiful young girl falls directly into Ryu's arms. This development completely shocks the boy, who stares down in disbelief at the human girl he is now holding. She stands up, and when Ryu checks if she's all right, she cheerfully calls him Daddy, explaining that she chose a form just like his. This leaves the protagonist speechless. He's never been a father before, but he realizes she now views him as her family. Ryu asks why she chose humanity instead of becoming a massive bird, and she admits it stems from a deep-seated loneliness. Since birth, she lived in the city without a mother or friends, and whenever she sought connection, people attacked her as a monster, and soldiers chased her away. That's why she fled when she first saw Ryu earlier. But everything changed the day he and Ruri stepped in to save her. It was the first time anyone had shown her kindness, filling her with joy and a desire to take on a human form to truly belong with the two people she loves. Understanding her feelings, Ryu gently pats her head. But with the dust still settling, the king calls out from the other side of the storm to ask if everyone is safe. Ryu had been so distracted that he completely forgot about the dwarves and the onlookers, quickly scrambling to dispel the surrounding flames. Although the group insisted they were unharmed, the king refused to brush off the incident, and even the blacksmith questioned how they could remain so calm after witnessing such incredible power. When the king inquired about the mysterious girl, Ryu explained that his bird companion had evolved into a human form. While the smith was skeptical, the king accepted it as a feat worthy of a unique divine beast. Concerns arose about the forging process, but the king assured them that the magical flames would actually aid production, ordering soldiers to calm the civilians while the group returned to the smithy. However, as they made their exit, a man named Mark stepped out from the shadows, quietly stooping down to retrieve a stray feather left behind on the ground. A knowing smile crossed his face as he realized that Ryu was far from an ordinary human being. 1 month later, the blacksmith completed his work, having used the high-quality materials Ryu provided to craft equipment that exceeded all expectations. The resulting armor was a masterpiece of flawless leather, enchanted to render the wearer virtually immune to the extremes of both ice and fire. By weaving Karn's feathers directly into the lining, the blacksmith ensured the gear offered superior thermal regulation and elemental resistance. With the defensive gear sorted, the group moved to an adjacent room where the main attraction was waiting for Ryu. Resting there was his newly completed blade. Forged perfectly from the great wolf's fang, the weapon was a single-edged masterpiece that immediately caught Ryu's eye. The smith explained that he used a foreign technique to maximize the single edge's cutting power, while Karen proudly chimed in that her contributions helped make it possible. The dwarf insisted that Ryu should be the one to christen the weapon, noting that while the creator usually names the blade, this unique piece belonged solely to him. Ryu was taken aback by the sudden responsibility, feeling a bit clueless about how to handle such a significant honor. However, memories of the great wolf and his grandfather flooded his mind, leading him to bestow the simple yet powerful name, Wolf. With the naming ceremony complete, they decided the only way to truly test the blade's edge was in combat, so they headed back to the city center. A massive crowd had already gathered, likely drawn by the rumors and spectacle of the previous experiments. The king apologized for the audience but assured Ryu that guards were posted for safety. Satisfied with the precautions, Ryu prepared himself, ready to finally see what his new weapon could do. The king raises the blade, declaring it a new masterpiece he forged personally, and bestows upon it the name Wolf. He then asks Ryu to test the weapon's limits by unleashing his full magical output into the sky, creating a spectacle to demonstrate its true power. Ryu steels himself for the attempt, noting that controlling such immense energy won't be an easy task. To ensure the safety of everyone nearby, he calculates his trajectory to minimize collateral damage, focusing the energy into a single concentrated point. Raising the sword toward the heavens, Ryu releases a massive torrent of raw magical power. The crowd watches in absolute awe as the blast literally splits the sky above them. Fear ripples through the onlookers as the sheer scale of the phenomenon defies all logic. However, that fear quickly turns to excitement as they praise the weapon, attributing the display to the king's superior craftsmanship. Ryu is shocked by the result, while Karen praises his expected brilliance. The king agrees, noting that the sword handles his unique magic far better than standard materials. Just as they discuss final adjustments, a commotion breaks out as people point back up at the sky. Gazes turn upward, and the mood shifts instantly when they spot something terrifying descending from the clouds. A massive dragon materializes out of thin air, carrying a group of riders on its back. Ryu tenses up, startled by the sudden intrusion. However, soon he quickly recognizes the figures riding the beast. The dragon descends, landing gently so the passengers can disembark. An old man steps forward, fixing his gaze on Ryu and noting that it has been quite a long time. Ryu is confused about how this stranger knows him, until Rory intervenes to introduce the man as her grandfather. The realization hits Ryu immediately. The rest of the group must be Rory's mother, father, and grandmother. The grandmother snaps at Ryu for staring, but the tension dissolves when the king greets the old man, who is relieved to see the monarch in good health. When asked about the reason for their sudden arrival, the old man admits he has a favor to ask of them. There was plenty left to discuss, but time was short. When Ryu asks about the favor, the old man reveals that a dormant threat is about to awaken. It goes by the name of the evil dragon. It is a colossal, pitch-black serpent with 3 heads, capable of wielding every form of ancient and modern magic. Long ago, it was slain, but the fresh blood soaked into the earth allowed it to resurrect, breaking the seal meant to contain it. It's a monstrosity beyond imagination, and recent reports confirm the seal is on the verge of shattering, so preparations for battle must begin immediately. Facing such a formidable foe requires immense power, which is why the old man is calling upon Ryu and his companions to lend their strength once again. Ryu hesitates, questioning his ability to fight a literal dragon, But the old man scoffs. After surviving training with the legendary wolves, Ryu is more capable than anyone else present. Seeing the old man's unwavering confidence, Ryu accepts the challenge. Since this unprecedented request comes from Rory's grandfather, they ask for the location, which turns out to be the Dragon Kingdom. To be precise, the beast is sealed in a cave nearby, and they'll need to make a forceful entry to deal with the threat. With time of the essence, the old man insists on discussing details en route. As they prepare to leave, Ryu is startled when the transport dragon suddenly speaks, commenting on the rarity of a human communicating with a legendary wolf. It seems interested to see if Ryu truly lives up to his status as a disciple of the wolves. Staring up at the immense creature, Ryu is awestruck, prompting the old man to apologize for the delayed introduction. This dragon is their ally, and it politely greets Ryu. The protagonist is stunned that the beast speaks human language so fluently, while the onlookers are baffled by Ryu's casual connection to such a powerful entity. The old man insists they head to the Dragon Kingdom immediately to talk further, so the king quickly bids everyone farewell. As they take flight, the old man notices Karen, recognizing her immediately as a named child. It seems Rory isn't the only special one. Karen is actually a legendary bird. Usually, a creature like her would be hunted for its magic and killed, leaving Ryu speechless at the revelation. Rory's father suddenly erupts in rage, accusing Ryu of stealing his daughter and demanding punishment, only for Rory's mother to silence him with a swift punch. She notes that Karen has a certain radiance and has grown deeply attached to both Rory and Ryu over the past month, clearly finding happiness with them. Rory has been taking care of Karen's every need, from feeding to bathing, effectively treating the girl like her own little sister. Since Karen has no parents, she was all alone. But she timidly adds that Ryu and Rory have been incredibly kind to her, which convinces the old man to accept her presence. After all, the bird is still just a child, so having a large family to look after her is for the best, especially since she has already been adopted as a beloved daughter by everyone there. She might be overwhelmed at first, but soon enough she'll come to view them as family. The sheer emotion of the moment nearly brings the child to tears, but Ryu is quick to comfort her, assuring her that everything will be fine. The dragon announces their arrival, prompting Ryu to glance down at their destination. What he sees below is absolutely massive and breathtaking. Even from this altitude, the city dwarfs his initial expectations. This is the Dragon Kingdom, featuring architecture unique to their kind, though their guide admits this settlement is a bit small for his taste. Since full-size dragons can't fit inside the structures, they must assume human forms to navigate the city and interact with others. Moments later, they touch down right in front of the main gates. As the beast lands and suggests they head inside, Ryu steps forward to express his gratitude. Suddenly, the dragon shifts into his human form, startling Ryu with his imposing height. He guides them forward, leading the group directly toward the stationed guards. The sentries immediately salute the dragon, who steps aside to introduce his passengers. When the guards question if these are the promised reinforcements, the dragon confirms that these allies, including a legendary beast, are here to assist. Their curiosity peaks regarding the human, prompting the dragon to reveal that Ryu is a disciple of the legendary wolves. The guards are incredulous, unable to fathom that a mere human could endure such elite training. Rory's father takes offense, interpreting their doubt as an insult to his clan's strength, leaving Ryu confused by the sudden aggression. He insists that if they doubt the boy's power, they clearly lack the insight to recognize true strength. To settle the matter, he demands to see their superior, proposing a duel against Ryu to prove their worth, much to Ryu's bewilderment. Taking up the challenge, the captain of the guard steps forward to face them. Rory's father declares that he will take full responsibility if Ryu loses, while their dragon companion steps forward to serve as the official witness. This duel will determine who stays and who goes, though the guard captain scoffs, remarking that Ryu looks like nothing more than an ordinary human. However, as the commander of the Dragon King's militia, he refuses to lose to a mere mortal and promises to show no mercy as the fight begins. The captain immediately charges straight at Ryu with overwhelming speed, who barely manages to block the strike, feeling the immense weight behind the blow before launching a quick counterattack. The captain is knocked back but recovers instantly, lunging at Ryu once more. He taunts Ryu, demanding to know why he can't seem to face him head-on in a proper clash. It isn't just the weight of his attacks. The captain's swordsmanship is terrifyingly fast, and Ryu knows he needs to find a way to end this quickly. Ryu realizes he is outclassed in pure skill, so he decides to infuse his blade with magic to bridge the gap, desperately searching for an opening. The moment their blades cross again, the opportunity finally presents itself. Ryu spots a critical weakness in the monster's defense, and by the time the captain realizes his mistake, it is already too late. Unleashing his full strength, Ryu violently hurls the captain against the chamber wall, The impact nearly knocks the commander unconscious, leaving the spectators and even Ryu himself stunned by the outcome. Ryu admits he miscalculated the sword's power and failed to hold back as much as he intended. The witnessing dragon calls the match, declaring Ryu the victor and congratulates him on a job well done. As they thank him, Ryu asks if the captain will be all right, but the witness assures him that dragons are built to withstand such battles. The Dragon King won't be angered by a fair duel, though Ryu is warned to be more careful with his overwhelming magical output in the future. With the matter settled, the dragon moves to open the massive gates so they can proceed. He places his hands on the heavy doors and pushes them open, officially welcoming them into the Dragon Kingdom. However, it quickly becomes apparent that their arrival is not going to be warmly received. As they make their entrance into the territory, they aren't unnoticed. A mysterious observer watches from afar, intrigued by a mere human capable of decimating an elite soldier. Finding Ryu's arrival fascinating, this shadowy figure decides to keep a close eye on him. Unaware of the spy, Ryu and his party arrive at their destination. The Dragon Guide explains that this city is sacred to their kind, boasting architecture that rivals even the grandest human kingdoms. As they stroll through the streets, Ruri notices Karen fidgeting. She asks what's wrong, pointing out that Karen's hair clips seem to be causing her discomfort. Since they have some spare time before their audience with the king, Ryu suggests they take a detour to go shopping. The idea instantly cheers up the girls, and they happily agree to the distraction. Afterward, the group heads toward the castle to formally introduce themselves to the Dragon Lord. The interior is bustling with activity, with dragons rushing back and forth carrying scrolls and exchanging urgent reports. Ryu observes the diversity of the crowd, prompting their guide to explain that this kingdom is a sanctuary for dragons who can assume human form. He elaborates that the population includes half-dragons and those trapped between forms, resulting in the wide variety of appearances they see. When Ryu asks about the king, the guide describes him as a highly evolved species possessing strength that commands absolute respect. Moments later, they arrive at the massive doors leading to the throne room. Inside, they find the Dragon King and Queen seated upon their thrones, radiating an otherworldly presence. Ryu immediately senses the intense aura surrounding the royals as their guide presents the party as the requested reinforcements. The king expresses his gratitude for such high-caliber warriors, while the queen focuses her gaze on Ryu, aware of his victory over an enemy captain. Intrigued by a human possessing strength rivaling a hero's, she places high hopes on him, though their guide quickly interjects to ease the tension. The king then shifts the focus to strategy, mentioning an upcoming council with the wolf tribe, and asks the group to wait in the visitors' room until then. The old man questions the validity of this strategic meeting, noting the absence of other races that should be lending their strength. Lowering his head, the king admits that currently, they have no choice but to fight the monster using only the people gathered in this room. The king confirms his fears. While previous heroes united the races, the new generation has caused friction, leading the other tribes to refuse any requests for aid. As the old man processes this, Ryu worries about their diminished military power, wondering if they can truly survive with such limited forces. Ryu suggests asking the current hero for help, but the queen explains the complication. The new hero views all dragons as mindless monsters and attacks them on sight, even those capable of speech. Ryu reflects on the hero's indiscriminate aggression. Realizing they have no other options, the old man accepts the situation, while the king offers a solemn apology for their predicament. Ryu's mind drifts back to when the heroine first started her adventures. Recalling a comment Taiga made, Ryu asks his friend why she had been acting so strangely lately. Taiga explains that her behavior went beyond strange. It was abnormal. During a recent mission, she slaughtered monsters with a terrifying, one-sided intensity that bordered on obsession. Ryu remembers her as a timid child who used to get scared easily. Taiga agrees, noting that her personality shift makes her difficult to approach, though neither of them understands the cause. Perhaps her sense of justice simply intensified after becoming a hero, but Ryu suspects there is a darker reason behind her transformation. Something must have driven the heroine to hate monsters so deeply that she now seeks their total extinction. Putting the past aside, they leave the meeting, acknowledging that the demands placed upon them have become significantly heavier. Elsewhere, the heroine is furious to learn that crafting her new sword requires a wolf's fang and the fire of a legendary beast, forcing her party to hunt for these rare materials. They had traveled this far hearing of a master blacksmith, but the knight notes that legendary weapons require legendary components. The heroine complains about the extra effort, though a nearby nun reminds her that they destroy everything in their path regardless. The cleric, Maria, points out that the heroine always charges into the most dangerous battlefields, so the knight agrees that she definitely needs the best weapon available to survive. Taiga suggests they head to the guild first to see if anyone has information on where to find these legendary materials. Agreeing with the plan, they proceed to the guild, but the strange atmosphere in the city draws everyone's attention. The knight notices civilians fleeing at the mere mention of the creatures. The heroine realizes this city has a troubled history with such monsters. Just as a stranger approaches, asking if they seek the wolf and the legendary bird, a mysterious hooded man stands before them. When the heroine demands his identity, he introduces himself simply as an informant. He asks if they are hunting the legendary beasts. The heroine confirms it, explaining that the blacksmith demanded a wolf's fang and a legendary bird's fire to forge her weapon. The knight presses the informant for details, but the man insists on a payment before he properly explains the current situation. He reveals that a month ago, a man accompanied by a fox and a legendary bird resolved the royal conflict, becoming something of a national hero. However, rumors claim this hero actually despises monsters, causing his own companions to fear that he might eventually turn his blade on them. The informant adds that intel leaked regarding beasts seeking revenge in a ruined city, prompting Maria to ask if this was the secret everyone was keeping quiet. Her expression darkens with rage as she declares she won't allow monsters to roam free, thanking the informant while Saiga tries to hold her back. But her mind is made up. She vows to eradicate every last one of those terrible beasts. And to do that, she is determined to hunt down Ryu, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, back in the visitor's room, Ryu and his companions are waiting for news. He isn't sure how critical the situation is, but the Dragon King and the elders are locked in a strategic meeting to discuss the matter. Ruri suggests exploring the castle, and since Karen is eager to join, Ryu agrees to take a walk, though they realize they should probably ask for permission first. Suddenly, a maid appears, stating she's in charge of attending to them, and offers to guide them around, surprising Ryu since he hadn't sensed her presence at the door. She leads them on a tour, passing through the main courtyard, the grand library, and finally the training grounds. Eventually they arrive at the kingdom's pride and joy, the central courtyard, a breathtaking space that captivates everyone. Ruri is in awe, and even Ryu admits he's rarely seen such magnificence, a compliment that clearly pleases the maid guiding them. Ryu takes the opportunity to ask if there are any princesses around, and the maid replies cryptically that children are indeed vital for the kingdom's future. Sensing another presence, Ryu turns and asks who has been secretly following them this whole time. A small child steps out from the shadows, surprised that she was actually spotted. Ryu asks what she wants, causing the girl to blush before she points directly at the weapon hanging from his waist. She demands that he hand over the sword, but Ryu instantly refuses the request. The rejection hangs in the air, and the atmosphere suddenly becomes incredibly heavy. When the girl demands to know why, Ryu explains that the weapon is precious to him and far too dangerous for a kid, but she snaps back, demanding he stop treating her like an infant. The maid intervenes, asking if she should summon the girl's guardian, but Ryu waves her off, assuring her that he has the situation under control. While Karen suggests they simply wait for the parents to return, the girl grows impatient, furious that they aren't taking her seriously. Declaring she'll simply take what she wants by force, she lunges at him, forcing Ryu to dodge. She makes a desperate grab for his blade, and when Ryu evades again, he realizes that despite her simple movements, she possesses shocking speed for someone her age. She demands he hand it over immediately, but Ryu refuses, glancing at Karen and signaling her to stay back and watch. Ruri notes that Ryu is merely toying with the girl, dodging effortlessly, though Karen looks like she wants to jump in and join the fun. Trembling with rage, the child can't understand why she can't land a single hit, and her frustration quickly reaches a boiling point. Suddenly, her hands transform into razor-sharp claws, catching Ryu completely off guard. She warns him that she's done playing nice, and if he gets hurt, it's his own fault, before launching herself at him with renewed aggression. Ryu hesitates for a split second, trying to figure out how to neutralize her without causing harm. He sidesteps at the last moment, causing the girl to fly past him and slam face-first directly into a stone pillar. Wincing at the impact, Ryu immediately checks to see if she's all right. But the adrenaline fades, and the child bursts into tears, wailing about the pain. She sobs, confused why her superior bloodline and magic failed her, while Ryu tries to calm her down just as a woman approaches to apologize for the delay. Ryu is stunned to realize it's the queen herself, confused as to why royalty is here instead of a simple guardian. The queen bows respectfully, offering a sincere apology for all the trouble her daughter has caused him. Ryu loses his composure entirely when the queen reveals that the little girl is the princess, and the maid is actually the queen's own mother. The attendant he had been speaking to earlier wasn't just a servant. She was the grandmother watching over the child until the mother arrived. Ryu is left reeling from the revelation, realizing he just spent the afternoon fighting a princess while her grandmother watched from the sidelines. It turns out the bratty girl is actually the princess of this kingdom. Ryu is completely taken aback by this sudden revelation. The Wolf Lord arrives to investigate the commotion and recognizes Ryu, while the maid greets him like an old friend. Naturally, they ask for an explanation regarding the chaos. The old man explains the girl demanded Ryu's sword, but she interrupts to blame Ryu for having the audacity to dodge her attacks. She insists she should have won, but the maid shuts her down, scolding the girl for her arrogant attitude. After apologizing for the princess's behavior, the maid reveals she has a favor to ask of Ryu. She wants him to be her granddaughter's sparring partner, but Ryu hesitates, pointing out there are many stronger candidates available. However, since the girl is interested in Ryu, she won't run away from training, so the queen begs for his cooperation to mold the future ruler. Ryu considers refusing, but the old man points out the gravity of the dragon royal family bowing to him. Ryu relents and tells them to raise their heads, but in exchange, he asks the maid to become his master. Recognizing her immense power as an empress, he seeks her guidance to get stronger, and she calmly accepts his request. Meanwhile, Karen refuses to sit on the sidelines, insisting that she wants to train as well. Ryu warns her about the danger and potential injury, but she is determined to become useful to the group. More importantly, she refuses to be left behind again, which finally catches Ryu's attention. The old man volunteers to train Karen, and since she's determined, Ryu agrees that gaining strength is never a bad thing. The old man warns that the maid is a harsh instructor, and she confirms that Ryu's hellish training begins tomorrow. The next day arrives, and Ryu is already pushed to his absolute breaking point. The maid orders him to get up, declaring that their Spartan training has only just begun. It makes him wonder if the training being offered to Karen is just as brutal. The maid critiques Ryu, noting that while his fundamentals are solid, his execution is far from spectacular and riddled with inefficiency. She bluntly states that at his current level, he wouldn't stand a ghost of a chance against the dragon they intend to challenge. Ryu realizes this training is far more grueling than he anticipated. But seeing Karn and the others giving their all, he knows he can't back down now. He has come too far to stand beside these heroes to quit now. He simply has to push past his limits and get stronger. Unfortunately, determination alone isn't enough, and he continues to face defeat after defeat. At the end of the first day, the maid announces a final cooldown of 100 laps, leaving the group completely drained and starving by the time they finish. As the maid steps away for a moment, the onlookers note that Ryu and the princess seem to be struggling the most with the regimen. Even though she is royalty, the princess is granted no special treatment, and the heavy physical toll is clearly weighing on her. A few days later, the intensity ramps up significantly as the two engage in a fierce sparring session. Ryu manages to grapple the girl and throw her to the ground, causing her to lose her temper over yet another humiliating defeat. Ryu is exhausted by the monotonous drills, struggling because he is still overthinking every single move before he attacks. The maid critiques him again, pointing out that while his form is decent, his reaction time is abysmal because he waits until an attack is already in motion. Against faster enemies, he won't even have time to blink, so he needs to learn to anticipate moves rather than just reacting to them. She insists that this feat is not impossible, provided he learns to read the flow of his opponent's magical power. Since magical energy signals intent faster than physical muscles can move, mastering this sense is the key to predicting attacks before they happen. Realizing words aren't enough, she asks if he's ever felt the crushing pressure of a superior opponent, triggering Ryu's memory of the Dwarven King's brother. To demonstrate this overwhelming pressure firsthand, the maid suddenly begins to strip off her clothes. Ryu flushes with embarrassment and frantically covers his eyes, completely misunderstanding the situation. But a massive shadow suddenly engulfs him as the woman sheds her human guise and transforms into a towering dragon. Now that she has revealed her true form, the real training can finally begin. A single scratch means immediate failure, and to make matters worse, Ryu is forced to surrender his weapons. While he tries to strike the dragon, the granddaughter is free to hunt him down, creating a battlefield that is fundamentally unfair. But this is the path he chose. To be trained by the strongest, he must endure the impossible. The old man watches from the sidelines and declares the start of the test, signaling the beginning of Ryu's hellish training. Ryu barely evades this dragon's first tail swipe, throwing himself backward with everything he has to avoid being crushed. The maid mocks him, warning that their future enemies are far worse, all while the granddaughter relentlessly closes the distance. He manages to dodge for a while, but he's completely gridlocked. Every time he gets close to the dragon, the girl interferes, preventing a single hit. The maid shouts that he has no time to think, scolding him for forgetting the instruction to read the magical power instead of using his eyes. As long as he relies on physical sight, he will never pass, and the brutal beatdown continues without pause. Ryu is pushed to his absolute limit, his vision fading as he stands on the precipice of death. He begins to question if this is the end, wondering if his human body has finally reached its breaking point. The maid recalls the old man's theory that a hidden power resides within Ryu. But seeing his struggle, she begins to doubt if it's true. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts as a terrifying aura begins to radiate directly from Ryu's body. Despite being beaten to a pulp, his eyes sharpen with a sudden intense clarity that catches the maid's attention. She glances at the old man, who simply smiles, knowing his dangerous gamble was worth the risk. Wondering if this is the boy's true potential, the maid orders the granddaughter to launch a fatal strike to finish Ryu right now. The girl hesitates, confused as to why she needs to kill him when he's already failing. But the order stands. The maid decides that if he dies here, then he never had a future to begin with. As the girl attacks with full force, Ryu laments his weakness, furious that after coming this far, he's still as useless as before. But he refuses to accept that fate. His eyes suddenly shine with overwhelming power, striking fear into the maid's heart. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocks the training grounds. As the smoke begins to clear, Ryu realizes he's completely unharmed and tries to process what just happened. In the split second before impact, he sensed the incoming magic, dodging and countering just in time to prove he could finally read his opponent's power. The maid insists the risk was worth it to unlock his potential, though when Ryu asks if the danger was fake, she admits she was actually being quite serious. Still, she is thrilled that he survived without major injury and applauds his impressive performance. The princess, however, is far from happy, lamenting that she failed the test while Ryu was the only one to succeed. She tries to accept that she'll just have to try again another day, but Ryu suddenly speaks up. While the two stand there confused by the outcome, Ryu points to a mark on his clothes. The princess's attack had actually landed earlier, and since the maid never specified where the strike had to be, it counts. Based on that technicality, the granddaughter passed as well, and her mood instantly shifts to pure joy. It is a massive relief after the intense pressure of the trial. Even Rory and Karen arrive on the scene to congratulate Ryu on passing the exam. Later, as the adrenaline from the battle begins to fade, the group reflects on the intensity of the fight, while the old man asks the maid for her honest assessment of the training. She admits that Ryu is exceptional. She never expected a human to endure her regimen or hold his own against ancient beings, yet he defied all expectations. She believes he is the only one strong enough to handle the princess's stubborn nature, provided he keeps an open mind. In fact, she is already plotting to help Ryu gain enough power to eventually become the princess's husband. The old man spits out his drink in shock, questioning if she's crazy enough to put a human on the dragon throne. But she insists that his strength is exactly what their bloodline needs. It seems that Ryu has already been chosen by a higher power. It was just as the old man had suspected. They were dealing with the power of a god. During their session, the maid felt a divine aura radiating from Ryu, confirming the old man's theory that his magic far exceeded human limits. Yet it raised the question, why did the entity choose Ryu over the countless others who had sought that power before? Regardless of the mystery, they needed to verify these suspicions with their deity. If the entity truly recognizes Ryu, it implies a bloodline connection that would allow him to unleash limitless strength. The old man wondered if anyone else had noticed this anomaly, but she doubted it. Still, it was time to seek answers from the past. For now, they would simply have to observe Ryu closely as his journey continued. 5 days passed as Ryu settled into his regimen with the maid, focusing on conditioning his body. And in that short time, his growth was nothing short of remarkable. When Ryu asked for an assessment, she admitted his strikes were significantly heavier than on day 1, proving the hard work was paying off. Although he was improving, she decided to surprise him by granting a mandatory day off. Since he had pushed his body to the limit, rest was essential, so Ryu decided to use this free time to hang out with Karen and Rory. It dawned on him that despite his time here, he hadn't actually explored the city yet. The following morning, his deep sleep was interrupted by a loud voice. Someone was persistently calling out to him. Ryu was groggy at first, but he quickly realized who was disturbing his peace. It was Rory, urging him to wake up as Ryu slowly opened his eyes and rose from his bed. She teased him for sleeping in, reminding him that she and Karen were waiting downstairs. They had a promise to explore the city today, and she intended to hold him to it. The city is packed with people, leaving the group completely unsure of where to go next. Even after pausing to think, they realize they know absolutely nothing about the city's layout. However, Karen gets distracted by a display of hair clips, so they decide to browse for accessories. Ryu agrees to the detour, but questions if it's really okay for the princess to tag along. The princess insists on joining them, offering to act as a local guide to repay them. Ryu feels awkward about having royalty casually join them, but the maid steps in to approve the plan. The maid has been summoned to an urgent meeting about future events, so she formally asks Ryu to look after the princess in her absence, as no other attendants are available. She acknowledges Ryu's strength, but the subtext is clear. If anything happens to the princess while she's gone, Ryu will pay dearly for it. With the bodyguard arrangements settled, the group heads inside a nearby jewelry store to take a look around. The shop's receptionist immediately approaches the princess to offer assistance, but she explains that her friends are the ones shopping. The store is filled with beautiful, high-end items. While the others browse, Ryu turns to the princess and asks if she plans on buying anything for herself. She claims she already owns plenty of similar jewelry and tries to deflect to Ryu, but he reminds her he has no interest in women's accessories. Eventually, she decides to browse just to kill time. Out of nowhere, she asks Ryu why he is so desperate to obtain power, a question that catches him completely off guard. Deciding to open up, Ryu admits that his drive comes from a desire to catch up to his childhood friends. They were born with rare combat classes while he was stuck with a mundane job, leaving him unable to join their adventures. Refusing to be left behind, he vowed to become stronger. He wants to prove he can stand on equal footing regardless of his class. When she asks what his job actually is, he reiterates that he is a beast Tamer. She gets annoyed, pointing out that no normal beast Tamer could ever stand up to her in a fight. Ryu agrees, crediting his strength entirely to his bond with Ruri and his companions. He confesses that if he hadn't met that girl, he never would have trained this hard or traveled this far from home. Excited by the topic of travel, the princess bombards him with questions about the world. Ryu bashfully admits he's not that worldly. This is actually only the second city he's ever visited. He assumes a royal like her would be well-traveled, but she sadly reveals that she has never once stepped outside the Dragon Empire, which shocks Ryu. She explains that her royal status forbids her from leaving the capital easily, even though she desperately craves freedom. As she talks about wanting to see the world, Ryu lowers his head, realizing they are quite similar. He knows exactly what it feels like to be trapped. She denies it, claiming it's impossible for her to join him right now, and asks Ryu if he truly believes a princess can venture out into the world, a question that resonates with his own past. Ryu recalls being left behind by his childhood friends out of concern, and while he knew they meant well, he couldn't help but feel frustrated and jealous. He wanted to stand beside them, not watch from afar. Realizing the princess feels the exact same way, he watches as tears well up in her eyes, confirming that her isolation mirrors his own. Her entire family constantly monitors her for her own safety, but she finds it suffocating. While others her age find joy in their travels, she is forced to wonder what it feels like to be the only one left behind. She dreams of embarking on a journey to visit unseen lands, meet new races, taste exotic foods, and experience the world in all its glory, regardless of the risks involved. Above all, she confesses that she simply wanted to make some friends, proving that while she is physically strong enough to be alone, her heart still longs for companionship. As Ryu considers the possibility that her pursuit of them was driven by loneliness, Karen suddenly interrupts, showing off a new hair tie she found. Ryu compliments the accessory, but when Karen asks what the two of them were discussing so intensely, the princess quickly dismisses it as a casual chat. Ryu decides to intervene, bluntly revealing that the princess was just talking about her desire to make some friends. This confuses Karen, who tilts her head and genuinely asks if they aren't considered friends already. The princess is taken aback by the question, unsure of how to process such an immediate acceptance. Karen points out that they've talked, traveled, and even trained together, insisting that these shared experiences automatically make them friends without needing a formal request. Karen admits that aside from her family, this is her first time having real friends, and she worriedly asks if being her friend is an unpleasant experience, leaving the princess speechless. As they exchange looks, Ryu admits that he doesn't have many friends either, expressing his happiness at their bond, while noting that Ruri is in the same boat regarding relationships outside of family. Seeing Karen look dejected by the doubt, the princess quickly reassures her that everything is fine. She declares that she wants to be friends with everyone and prioritize calling them by their given names. But when Karen suggests buying hair clips, the princess mentions she already owns plenty. Karen clarifies that she wants them to have matching clips to symbolize their bond, so the whole world will know they are close friends. The princess fights back tears of joy and agrees. Observing this, Ruri notes how happy they look and acknowledges that staying together is a good thing. Ryu then turns to Ruri, mentioning they still have funds from the materials they sold, and asks if she wants a necklace, but she dismisses the options on display. She explains that she prefers something practical she can wear during battle, so Ryu hands her a scarf, leaving her momentarily confused by the gesture. She notes that the accessory feels light and decides to wear it on her arm, blushing as the white band contrasts beautifully with her black hair. Ryu admits he's clueless about fashion and wouldn't be offended if she hated it, but she insists that the gift is absolutely perfect. She promises to cherish it, vowing to take care of the accessory with all her love and affection. After picking up a few items, they head to a bustling sale event, where the princess confidently tells him to leave the bargaining to her. She wants to ensure everyone leaves satisfied and that their little outing is a complete success. But right at that moment, a sudden commotion breaks out, leaving them wondering what is going on. The maid suddenly descends from the sky, urgently ordering everyone to halt and admitting that the situation has deteriorated. The dragon's seal has become critically unstable and will likely break today, so Ryu tenses up, realizing the chaos has already begun. Despite the sudden news, there is no turning back, so Ryu asks if they can reach the ceiling cave, confirming that's exactly why the maid appeared. They need to briefly return to the castle to gear up before they can move forward to face the threat. Meanwhile, deep inside the cave, the seal finally shatters completely. The dragon within stirs, shaking its massive tail as it declares its awakening. The beast announces that the time has finally come for it to rise and conquer the world once more. Back outside, the situation is dire, and the group sprints toward the objective as fast as they can. The moment of the inevitable confrontation has finally arrived. As they rush toward the danger, Ryu asks if a breach like this has ever happened in the past. They were too inexperienced to face it properly before, considering it a formidable foe, and Ryu is unsure if he currently has the power to stop such a monster. Ryu falls into a thoughtful silence, and while the maid is stressed, she understands exactly what is going through his mind. His weakness isn't his humanity, but his lack of confidence. However, if he can't believe in his own training, he should trust in the master who believes in him. She insists that he needs to stand tall because he is far stronger than he realizes. Inspired by their confidence, the princess vows to do her best, but Ryu refuses to let the situation escalate to a point where she needs to fight. Moments later, he arrives at the underground chamber and finds the seal currently intact. The king arrives shortly after, praising everyone's efforts, explaining that the mages are pouring their mana into the seal to prevent it from shattering prematurely. However, the mages are reaching their limit and beg for help, warning that the beast will revive in mere minutes. Understanding the gravity of the situation, the king orders them to leave the rest to him. But suddenly the seal cracks and shatters much faster than anticipated. The king and his allies freeze in shock. Recovering his wits, the king screams for an immediate evacuation, realizing the dragon is already coming back to life. The walls begin to split open as a cursed voice echoes from the darkness, declaring that it has been waiting for this very moment to meet Ryu. Everyone stands paralyzed, completely unsure of how to react. The voice continues, expressing a twisted joy at being able to lay eyes on them once again. Finally, the beast fully emerges from the shadows. It is a colossal white three-headed dragon. The monster surveys the group, noting the presence of a legendary wolf and a fellow dragon among their ranks. It then focuses on Ryu, identifying him as Zero, the hero of this era, standing alongside his companions. Ryu is confused and denies being a hero, but the king wastes no time talking and orders everyone into battle formation. The dragon mocks their efforts, calling their resistance useless and stating it has no interest in a boring skirmish. Instead, it casts a powerful spell, instantly sweeping everyone away from the chamber. The old man panics in the confusion just before the magic takes hold and teleports them away. Ruri and the princess are bewildered by the sudden shift, but the dragon explains that it moved them to a separate dimension to avoid ruining the castle during their fight. It made it clear that the only opponents it deemed worthy were the heroes group. Now it was finally time to have some fun. Meanwhile, back where everyone had been teleported, wolf beasts were frantically trying to shatter the barrier walls. But it was hopeless. The dragon's magic was beyond their comprehension, causing Ruri's father to grow increasingly agitated. He insisted on rushing to help, but the elder urged him to stay calm, reminding him that Ryu and the others had trained tirelessly and wouldn't fall easily. They needed to focus on their own escape, but suddenly, the situation took a turn for the worse. A massive snake lunged at the elder, forcing him to engage in immediate combat. Glancing around, he realized they were surrounded by a swarm of serpents, meaning this battle would take much longer than anticipated. Back at the main battle, Ryu barely managed to evade an incoming strike, throwing himself backward to create distance. Realizing that mere evasion wouldn't be enough to defeat the dragon, his allies shouted for him to press the attack, though Ryu snapped back that he didn't need the lecture. He surged forward and landed a solid cut, but the dragon didn't even try to dodge. It seemed to be deliberately accepting the damage. The maid screamed for him to stop, realizing that the dragon's spilled blood was manifesting into snakes, meaning every reckless attack only multiplied their enemies. Exhausted and out of options, they realized they needed to end this in a single decisive strike, though their current strength seemed insufficient against such a beast. The maid glanced at Ryu, placing her hope in the dormant power hidden within him to handle the situation. The dragon mocked his stance, asking if he had a new technique, but Ryu admitted he was preparing the same move as before. Suddenly, multiple layers of magical barriers began to materialize around them. The sudden display of power caught everyone completely off guard. A massive explosion followed, shaking the ground and revealing the terrifying potency of the spell. It was the dragon casting these high-level spells, a feat that would drain a normal mage instantly, as it laughed and taunted them for their hesitation. With the beast chanting magic non-stop, they couldn't find an opening to attack, leaving them completely unsure of their next move. The maid commands everyone to cease their panic and observe the enemy's movements. Losing their composure now means losing the war. Despite Ryu and the others' newfound strength, their lack of experience shows, leaving them no choice but to pray. The Dragon King returns in time to save them. They need to hold the line until then, but the princess suddenly declares her intention to end this nightmare with a single, decisive strike. She insists they leave it to her before the enemy completes their chant. But just as the maid shouts a warning to be careful, the princess unleashes her true form, transforming into a dragon, and with time running out, the maid follows suit, revealing her own draconic form. However, the villain is merely irritated by this display, scoffing that the princess is nothing more than a nuisance. She watches in disbelief, trying to comprehend how that dragon is able to cast such powerful magic without even weaving a chant. Ryu is left bewildered as a massive explosion suddenly rips through the area, leaving everyone confused about what just transpired. When the smoke clears and Ryu finally manages to open his eyes to look ahead, he sees the maid lying on the ground, completely defeated and battered. Ryu is struck speechless, unsure of how to salvage the situation, before desperation takes over and he screams the maid's name. But the enemy simply mocks them, calling them pathetic wretches for thinking they could stop the inevitable. The beast demands they get out of his way immediately. With a brutal kick, the dragon launches the maid across the room, sending her crashing violently into the wall. Her body refuses to respond, and she can't even speak. The paralysis has taken complete hold of her. The petrification status is fatal, and the dragon taunts that surrendering is their best option, noting how disappointing this generation of heroes is compared to the last. The battle intensifies as a massive snake lunges toward the wolves, leaving Rory's father completely stunned by the ferocity of the attack. Even after cutting down wave after wave of these serpents, it feels pointless, as they just keep spawning in greater numbers, no matter how hard the group fights. Realizing the situation is dire, the old man notes how long he's been separated from Ryu's group and urges the wolves to run faster so they can regroup. He prays that Ryu has managed to keep the rest of the party together during his absence, unaware of the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Ryu is locked in a fierce duel against the dragon, who arrogantly demands more entertainment from the hero. Nearby, the princess begs her injured grandmother to stand up, but receives no response from the unconscious woman. The dragon sneers at the pathetic display, deciding that perhaps a death is required to draw out their true power. Ryu suddenly spots the beast launching a devastating attack directly toward the defenseless princess. Freezing in fear, she can only embrace her grandmother tightly, bracing for the inevitable impact. But as the smoke from the explosion clears, it reveals Ryu standing firm with his sword raised, having blocked the blow. As the princess stammers her thanks, Ryu sharply tells her to pull herself together and focus. He warns her that if she dies here, all her rigorous training and her vows to protect her people will have been for nothing. He acknowledges her worry for the maid, but insists that the only way to save her is to win this fight right now. They need to stand united, and hearing this, the light of determination finally returns to the princess's eyes. Even the injured maid begins to stir, groggily admitting she's at her physical limit but still alive. The princess reassures her, promising that she won't hesitate or falter again this time. They prepare to fight as one, and the dragon notices the sudden shift in the girl's intensity. It decides it's time to test if these humans can actually defeat him, challenging Ryu to prove he's worthy of the title of hero. To escalate the battle, the beast summons multiple magic portals to rain destruction down on them. Ryu charges forward, weaving through the barrage, while Karen spots an opening and unleashes a torrent of fire at the dragon. The dragon deflects the flames, seemingly annoyed that a mere child is capable of causing it so much trouble. A trap spell suddenly manifests beneath Karen, erupting into tentacles that try to snare her, but she flies clear just as Ryu shouts a warning. A tentacle lashes out toward her feet, but Ruri refuses to be an easy target. She deftly avoids the strike, quickly coordinating with her team in the heat of battle. The dragon shifts its aggression toward Ryu, but the princess steps in to block its path. Ryu seizes the opening to attack, but the beast effortlessly deflects the blow, scoffing at his weakness. Unwilling to give up, the princess holds the line while Ryu desperately analyzes their opponent. Mere evasion drains their magic reserves, and the dragon's impenetrable scales make landing a counterattack nearly impossible. Ryu racks his brain, thinking back to his training with the maid to find a singular weak point. He focuses intently, reading the flow of magical energy coursing through the environment. Suddenly, he detects a disturbance in the mana flow around the dragon's tail. It isn't just a simple appendage. The chaotic magic didn't make sense until Ryu noticed the feathers scattering across the ground. Gripping a fallen feather, he realizes what needs to be done and urgently signals Ruri and Karin. He whispers the risky plan, but Ruri hesitates, knowing that Ryu will be the one in the crosshairs if they fail. However, Ryu insists it's possible, banking on the certainty that his allies will cover him. He places his life in their hands, trusting them implicitly to execute the maneuver. Seeing his determination, Ruri and Karin agree, ready to give everything to make this gamble work. The princess is left confused by their huddle, but Ryu quickly signals for her to get ready. Furious that they are scheming right in front of him, the dragon prepares to crush their arrogance. As the monster begins chanting a spell, Ruri springs into action, leaping straight toward it. Her sudden charge alters the trajectory of the battle, forcing the enemy's hand. The dragon sneers, mocking her as a helpless pup caught in midair with nowhere to run. Flames erupt around the dragon, leaving the beast confused as it tries to process the sudden turn of events. It deduced that the birds must have generated the inferno, yet they shouldn't have been close enough to trigger such a reaction. Seizing the moment, the princess charges through the blaze, launching a direct assault while the dragon's guard is down. Taking the hit, the beast questions how a mere mortal survived the flames, expecting her to be reduced to ash instantly. But she clenches a phoenix feather between her teeth, following Ryu's plan to distract the enemy while the relic shields her from the heat. Amidst the chaos, the dragon's stone magic is rapidly depleting. Once its mana runs dry, it won't be able to cast another spell. Knowing its power is finite, the heroes shift their trajectory, aiming to deceive the monster once again despite the impressiveness of the first strike. The dragon begins channeling a lethal spell intended to inflict the same fate the princess's grandmother suffered, but she taunts the beast, claiming its efforts are futile. Her confidence is justified, for when the creature glances to its side, it realizes one of its arms has been completely severed. Before it can react, it notices a tail is missing too. Ryu had correctly identified the appendage as the source of its magical power. Instead of raging, the dragon bursts into laughter, praising their skill and admitting they are the first to force him to use his full power. Suddenly, the fresh blood spilling from his wounds begins to morph, pouring out as a swarm of writhing snakes. It becomes terrifyingly clear that the true battle is only just beginning. The beast roars in delight, proclaiming that things are finally becoming interesting and the thrill of combat has returned. Craving more bloodshed and victory, the dragon commands the serpents to strike, showing no mercy as his victims close their eyes for what could be the last time. However, amidst his bloodlust, the monster senses something strange, an anomaly in the flow of the battle. He realizes that the key element required to seal his fate is noticeably absent from the field. In a flash of realization, the dragon understands that the hero, Ryu, has been missing from the skirmish until this very moment. The beast frantically scans the area, demanding to know if there are more surprises as he hunts for the hero's energy signature. Suddenly, Ryu materializes in the sky above, announcing that he has finally arrived to end this. His sword radiates light, the blade now fully infused with magic. He had used the delay to charge his spell, prompting the dragon to speak. The creature's wish has finally become reality, turning the battle into a legend as it rejoices in fighting the hero's true form. As the blade connects, a massive explosion erupts, signaling that the time to seal the beast has come again.